not one of us is ever done. So if anybody listening to this is thinking, well, that's all fine and good for you, but I'm however old I am, so that ship has sailed. It hasn't. If you can think that thought, that means you're still here. And I'm living proof of that. No one is ever done. The world is a garden of delights, even in the most ordinary moments and in the most mundane details. They shimmer with possibility.
So first, I do want to thank you very, very much for making the time to speak with me today. I've really been looking forward to it. So thank you.
You're very welcome. Yeah, happy to be here.
When I was thinking about how to introduce you, I thought he's a theater writer, producer, collaborator with others, and he is a master of the autobiographical monologue. Does that hit some? Because you're a professional with many roles.
Yeah. That all works. That all sounds appropriate.
I've missed a few things. I know there are some things that also fall a little bit outside of that realm.
And if they're relevant, I'm sure it'll come up in conversation.
Amazing. Thank you, TJ. So probably I would start by asking you, what attracted you to theater? How did you start working in theater?
I was bitten by the bug at age 3. It wasn't the theater bug. It was the entertainment bug when I was taken to see Star Wars in the movie theaters. And I was smitten. And that led me into kind of the golden age of George Lucas and Steven Spielberg movies. So I saw Empire Strikes Back and Raiders of the Lost Ark and E.T. and Return of the Jedi in the theaters. And I wanted so badly to be in that world. So theater just seemed the stepping stone to get into that world. Theater ended up being kind of an awkward fit, actually, because there's a pretty big difference between Raiders of the Lost Ark and Chekhov. And it wasn't okay to admit to my classmates or my professors or even to myself that I really preferred Raiders of the Lost Ark when I was in theater school, and that I didn't love the great plays and the great playwrights, and it didn't fascinate me and entrance me to read these plays or to work on scene study in them or to audition for them or to be in them. It took me a long time to figure that out of like, oh, okay, what I was really attracted to with those early experiences was that feeling. That yes from the body, that feeling of transcendence, of almost godliness that I was getting as an audience member, but it was just being transmitted so powerfully through those works of art that I couldn't help but respond to it. And that's what I wanted. It was to feel like that and to make people feel like that. So that's what started me on it. And then eventually I found my way towards the kind of theater that I have built my career doing, which is devised theater. Theater that the person or people involved have created from the ground up.
So tell me a little bit more about that, because I'm not familiar with that term. So devised theater, what does that mean?
Devised theater, that means that you are not performing somebody else's play. You are creating your own work. And if it's a play in the conventional sense of one actor plays one character and they talk to each other and then, maintain the facade that the audience isn't there and have a realistic quote unquote interaction, great. Or if it's a performance where there's no fourth wall and there's one actor and you're just talking to the audience, hello, I'm really me. I'm not playing a character. This is a story from my life. Also great. Or maybe there's movement, or maybe there's multimedia, or maybe there's a character or a number of characters, really anything. The common factor is the people involved in the project have created it from the ground up. And implicit in that is that it's an expression of who those people are. Might be one person, might be an ensemble of a dozen or more, but this is what we care about. This is what we're interested in. It might be a topic that's at large in the world. It might be something from one or more than one person's life, but this is what we want to communicate to the world, rather than we would like to do justice to the brilliant writing of Carol Churchill or the brilliant writing of Anton Chekhov or Shakespeare or whoever.
Okay. So in terms of your evolution in theater, what was the first piece that you worked on that was the most meaningful to you, that you started feeling like you were expressing who you were through that piece in the devised theater?
I had a similar moment to what I described seeing Star Wars in the theater when I was 3 in another movie theater. I was 17, right on the verge of turning 18, right on the verge of going to theater school. And I saw a double bill of feature films of the stage monologues of Spalding Gray. So Spalding Gray would sit at a desk and tell stories from his own life. And the first movie of this was made by Jonathan Demme, who went on to win Best Picture for Silence of the Lambs a few years later. This was made in 1986, I believe, and it was filmed in a theater that sat maybe 100. You never see the audience. But he just sits at a desk and talks and tells stories about his life. And he plays all the different characters. He does sound effects with his mouth. He speaks into a small microphone on the desk in front of him. He has a sheet of notes. He's got a glass of water. And he just was entrancing. So I fell in love with that. And that began the very long process of me eventually doing a parallel to that myself, which was performing monologues of my own on stage. So I did my first monologue of that kind when I was just finishing theater school, and it felt incredible. But I also knew that the show isn't quite what I want it to be. But it's a stepping stone on the way there. And then I did another one. I did that at the Victoria Fringe a year later, which again was like, yeah, it's better than the previous one, but it's not where I want to be. And then I hit something with the third one. The third one I'd figured something out unconsciously. I didn't train to do this. I trained to be an actor, to audition to say somebody else's lines. I learned a lot by osmosis. I watched a lot of movies. I watched a lot of plays. I read a lot of books, and not books on how to write, just novels. I was mostly reading novels, but all of this feeds you. Every single thing you read and see, every conversation you have feeds your artistic soul, whether you realize it or not, whether it's happening on a conscious level or not. Everything teaches you of here's how you can engage an audience. And all of those unconscious lessons just kind of reached a ripe point for my third show, which I titled Tired Cliches, and toured to fringe festivals across Canada. And the very first time I performed it, I could just feel it of like, oh, I got something here. Actually, before that, when I wrote the first draft, I remember sitting at my typewriter. That's how long ago this was. And typing up the first draft and finding the ending as I was typing it and just reeling of like, oh, I got something here. And that intuition was right. That yes from the body that I'd felt so many times before and that had hooked me on this whole thing was there again. And that proved right as I toured it. And that first tour was very difficult because I had no reputation. Nobody knew who I was. I had an abstract title that did not have any relation to the show whatsoever. And the show was not easy to describe when I was promoting it, whether to journalists or to people standing in lineups for other shows. But the few people that came got it. And there were those magic moments where I know that you know, and you know that I know that you know, that happened between me and the audience again and again and again, that it was just undeniable of like, there's something here and this is worth devoting my life to.
What was the shift? What was it that went from the first to the second to the third piece, that third piece was somehow categorically different, advanced from where you had started? What is it that changed?
It was a really simple thing that's almost hilarious and embarrassing to admit. The third show had a through line. The first and the second shows didn't. They were just kind of collages of different thoughts or short stories that I'd had, but they weren't linked by a narrative, nor were they linked by an overarching theme. I had just come up with these things and put them together kind of as an intuitive mishmash, which, so they were uneven. There were parts that were really good and there were parts that were okay. And, there were parts that probably weren't as good, but it didn't add up to anything. Was the third one, I found a way to link it all. So there was an overall story linking the various bits. And then the big epiphany that happened as I was sitting at my typewriter, I came up with a device that linked all the extraneous bits that I've been weaving in together. So suddenly everything, no matter how unrelated it had seemed for the first 59 minutes of the show, in the 60th minute becomes clear, oh, that was all part of it too. There is method to this madness. This was all headed in a very specific direction. And that's something that I then continued with every show I did after that. It's like the pretty fundamental question, what is this show about?
I would be curious how you see the themes in your work, how those themes have evolved over time. So if your third show, you hit the ground and you realized that was going to be there, you needed a guiding principle or narrative that tied those pieces together. How have you seen that theme evolve over the course of your career?
I can split my career, at least in terms of autobiographical monologues, into two pretty even halves. So the first half was about 10 years. And then the second half, well, it's a little bit more now, but about the same. And in the first half, a lot of stories about unrequited love and shitty jobs. Both of those are, on the one hand, just other expressions of like the entry into adult life. Of like, because these are just, I mean, you can have unrequited love when you're a teenager or you're a kid, but it's just different when you're an adult, especially when you had a life like I had in those years, which involved a lot of time on the road. So there was a lot of long distance, or I had a lot of different shitty jobs because they were always funding my next Fringe tour. Because you have to pay to do a Fringe tour, you have to pay to be in these different festivals, but you make your box office, so you can make money. It's not just a pay to play thing. So I just worked a variety of shitty jobs, and then met a lot of people, had a lot of different experiences. So I'd harvest those, and on a deeper level than that, what I was doing was I was kind of embracing my story. So my story as a person, which, I would tell to anybody on stage and off, and was just kind of implicit in every conversation that I would have, was that I'm not loved, not seen, and don't belong. So those three things, of course, naturally lead to unrequited love. I'm not loved. They naturally lead to shitty jobs. I don't belong. Like, I'm in somebody else's workplace, and the rest of the staff has this camaraderie that I don't have access to. But you know what? I don't want that. And I just took these as a given. It never occurred to me to question these things. They were just fundamental principles. I'd never voiced them even to myself. What split my career into those two halves is the Enneagram. So the Enneagram is a personality typology, among other things. Really, it's a system of self-understanding, and it's a framework for self-inquiry. And the most known aspect of it is the personality typology, in which there are 9 basic personality types. I was dragged into that world kicking and screaming because I didn't want to be put in a box. And many people who are into personality typologies, no matter what they are, whether it's the Zodiac or Myers-Briggs or a DISC or the Enneagram, use it precisely as that. They do a test and they discover I'm an INFP, or I'm a Cancer, or I'm a Enneagram 4, or whatever it is. And here's my list of characteristics. This is what it says that I'm like. This is what it says I would do well in these jobs, not so well in other jobs. If I'm in a relationship, I'm going to look for this. And my partner would do well to keep this in mind about me. Isn't that great? That's my identity. I embrace that. That's the way the Enneagram and other typologies are used most of the time. With the Enneagram, that's not how it's intended to be used. That is the opposite of how it's intended to be used. The animating principles under it are, here's what I get caught up in. My personality is a survival strategy that I adopted early in life to get my needs met. And I just learned that if I do this, this, and this, then I will get what I believe I need. And then I will associate myself with these things. And I will believe that that's who I really am. And if somebody asks me to describe myself, I'll describe myself with this set list of characteristics. And I will do the things that I've learned to do, that I've gotten better at doing over the years, time after time after time, even when they're not working, even when they actively make things worse, which is generally the case in the second half of life. That's when you've had enough life experience that you can look back and you can see the patterns, and you can see the common element in all of those unrequited loves was me. And maybe it's not because that person didn't love me. Maybe it's because I somehow engineered a situation where I could feel rejected in a way that was familiar to me. Because even though that's not seemingly a desirable state, it actually fits my story that I'm unloved, unwanted, and not seen. And there's certain comfort in that, especially if that has just been my understanding of who I am and what my role in this world is ever since I could remember. And I don't have to do that. If I have presence, if I can come back to myself, I can remember that that's one story among many stories. It's not necessarily true. It doesn't necessarily hold up to any kind of scrutiny. And it certainly doesn't serve me. In that I, as a free adult, can make other choices and live in a different way. So the one-person shows in the second half of my career have been various degrees of untangling my story. And the running theme in those are generally, here's something that happened in my adulthood that now helps me understand a pattern that was invisible to me that goes back my entire life, that was only visible when this thing happened. And let's talk you through it. And it's not just here's the pattern, but here's how this pattern has sabotaged my life. And here's what it's like to sit with that. And here's the different path that I can possibly chart now that I know that.
TJ, like everything you're saying is hitting very hard to home right now. Your timing on this, our timing to be talking is just ridiculous. So given so using the Enneagram to understand those things about ourselves and how we behave in patterns that if we don't question them, we just continue to reenact even if they don't serve us. I'd like to understand more about how you sit on stage by yourself and share all that with the people in the audience in an evening, because I find that idea absolutely overwhelming that you're able to do that and be very honest about who you are and what you're feeling, especially if you're getting into the deeper things around how you sabotage yourself and the things that you do that don't serve you. So can you tell me a little bit about just the experience of doing that?
Well, there's two layers to it. And one is just the technical layer of, how can you turn your thoughts and experience into a monologue on stage that you then perform? Anybody can learn that. And I genuinely believe that. There are various teachers, including me. I run a course on how to run a one-person show online. And there are techniques, there are just formats. There's ways to look at it that the young me that was starting out really would have benefited from knowing. And then a lot of people are intimidated to memorize a big swath of text. A one-person show that's about an hour usually clocks in at about 8,000 words, and people are terrified to do that. And that is varying degrees of easy or difficult depending on the person. For me, it happens to be pretty easy. Like I have a good memory, and it's just not that challenging for me to do that part. Although for some people that is just a big thing to overcome. But again, that's a technical thing. What's much more difficult is the emotional part of the journey, because you're digging into your most vulnerable and tenderest places. And your personality and your inner critic are doing everything they can to protect you. That voice in your head that's really mean is trying to protect you. It believes it has your best interests at heart, and it doesn't want you to be humiliated, and it doesn't want you to be ostracized, because that is our deepest fear, because that's the species we are. If we didn't have community, particularly for the first dozen or more years of our life, we would die. We would literally die. And if we didn't have that, right through adulthood, we might not literally die, but our quality of life would be rapidly diminished. And not having friends in adulthood is a health hazard on par with smoking. This has been said by health professionals. So every time I do this, every time I up the stakes on what I'm revealing to the audience, all of those voices come in my head and say, do not do this. This is social suicide to do this. I did a show in the summer of 2012, and then again for a few years afterwards. And this show's on YouTube if anybody wants to see it. It's called Medicine, where I divulged the most difficult experiences of my life that I could imagine at that point. And I walked on stage for my first performance having been terrified throughout the entire creation process by my inner critic that told me that I would probably have as many walkouts per performance as I had people staying, and that I was about to burn bridges with many, many friends and acquaintances and peers, and that I would have a number of people not even willing to make eye contact with me after I did the show. And not because the show was attacking other people. This wasn't like I'm going to get revenge on everybody who's wronged me. It was just the opposite. It was all about me, all about my difficulties, all about trauma, all about my anxieties, all of that. And those voices were there, powerful. But there was another voice that said, maybe not, do it anyway. And that's the voice that won. And I went out, and all of the fearful voices could not have been more wrong. I was embraced and seen and given a feeling of belonging like I had never experienced, like I had never dreamed of in my wildest fantasies. And then what I have experienced from doing that show many times and all the shows that followed that went on in the path that show trailblazed for me, it has increased, and I have discovered that the personal somehow becomes universal. I don't quite know how that happens, but time and time again, and ever since in the second half of my career, I make a point of letting the audience know that I will be out, on stage or outside the venue and wants to say hello. And there's always people. And usually what they say is how much they related to the show, no matter how specific I make it to the details of my life. And then when I find out like their story, because I usually ask, those details, no, they obviously don't share that. They didn't grow up in my family. I mean, I had a pretty unusual upbringing for a number of reasons, but the things underneath clicked in sometimes a frighteningly specific way for people. So there's this sense of universality, this sense of like, we're all in this, and of empathy and of bonding and belonging, again, that I never thought was available to me, that I didn't think I even wanted, because that was part of my story too. It's like, I'm not wanted, loved, don't belong, and I don't want to. The people that have those things, the people that want those things, they're superficial. They're social butterflies. They have meaningless conversations. Not like me. I'm off on my own. I have depth. I'm reading books by authors nobody else reads. I'm listening to music that needs me emotionally that nobody else gets. And if I tried to share it with them, they wouldn't get it. And fuck them. Who needs them? But of course, all of that is just a defense mechanism over an underlying deep, powerful shame, which is I'm not lovable. And I don't even dare admit to myself in my heart of hearts how desperately I want to be loved. And yet, what's the way to get it? Opening myself up, sharing that exact part of me, that exact deep, shameful, vulnerable part. And there I find my common bonds with the rest of humankind. And what could be better? Like I said, it literally changed my life.
What do you think it was that made that second voice just a little bit louder or a bit more persistent? The one that said, take a chance, over the voice that said, don't be an idiot.
It's kind of an updated version of what I felt watching Star Wars when I was 3. When there's an experience that's so powerful that it can't be denied, it really does feel divine or supernatural in some way. The show Medicine was about a retreat that I had participated in which Dr. Gabor Mate, who's a physician and author and activist, is that stress and trauma from early life that goes on unprocessed wreaks havoc in adulthood in any number of ways. The show is on YouTube in full. If anybody wants the full details, that's the place to go. The part that's relevant to this story is that I felt a oneness and a love that was so powerful, it could not be contained. And that was the strike of lightning that made me realize I have to do this as a show. I absolutely have to. And the resonance of that was there for me as kind of a battery, giving me life and energy and encouragement and love when I needed it the most, when those doubts were at their most powerful, when they were at their most desperate to prevent me from doing this. That was this light that simply would not go out, that said, maybe do it anyway. And the gentle love of that voice was all I needed.
One part is recognizing these things in ourselves that came from trauma. And then the second part, though, is also then being able to release it. It's not enough to just notice it. You also have to release it. So are your shows and maybe other work that you do, are those your opportunities to release? Is that what you feel when you perform?
Absolutely. The most frequent note I give anybody I work with on a one-person show, whether it's one-on-one or in a class, is tell your story. They're not all stories, but most are. And one-person shows aren't all autobiographical, but again, most are. But the note that I give is tell it in the present tense. because we tend to
Oh.
tell stories conversationally or on stage. We've absorbed telling the past tense. Novels are written in the past tense, particularly novels that are told in the first person, because that's the conceit, and that is the reality. I'm standing up in front of you, telling you a story about something that happened, maybe that thing that happened decades ago, maybe it happened earlier today, but it's in the past. So I can tell you about this thing that happened. And no matter what it involved, whether it was something hilarious or something traumatic or anywhere in between, it's over. And I'm here telling you the story of what happened. But another thing people often do conversationally is they'll slip into the present tense. So they will say, yeah, just yesterday, I'm in traffic, and then I'm driving, and then suddenly this car cuts me off, and blah, blah. That's all the present tense. And when you do that deliberately, particularly with something on stage, what you end up doing is you're programming yourself to feel the emotions that you felt. When you say it in the past tense, that can still happen. It's just a lot less likely, and you're more protected from that, because no matter how difficult the thing that happened in the past was, it happened in the past, and I'm telling you about it now from a distance. Whereas when I'm telling it in the present, I am experiencing it again. So in medicine and in all the shows that followed, when I describe what I went through on that retreat, I describe it in the present tense. And that burst of love, that's the end of the show. I had some real difficult times in the middle of that retreat, and I embodied them. And I felt profound alienation on stage every time I did it. I felt profound shame, profound rejection, and sadness and despair in front of witnesses. And then I come through the other side and feel love and belonging and joy and compassion in real time in front of witnesses, which makes it that much easier to evoke those feelings in the audience as well. We're all going on this emotional journey together, as well as a narrative arc together. And that ended up being this almost form of technology to release stress and trauma. Those stories, like they're persistent. They always want to come back, but the more evidence you build up, just the quieter they are. They just have a harder time seeming credible.
You made a point of saying before that, your stories are not about taking revenge on people from the past. They're really, you're talking about yourself and you're sharing your story. But how do you balance that, those stories that from your past, the traumas that you experienced, I'm thinking most likely did involve other people. So how do you go about, they're your stories because they happen to you, and you have your way of seeing them or your way of perceiving them, which those people who are involved may not share. And that's okay. These are your stories. But do you have any hesitation around when you're sharing those stories? You can't help but involve those other people in your performance. And so what is that line of which part is mine and where do I protect? Maybe it's not a good word, but how do I help those people not feel attacked or judged when I'm telling my story?
Yeah, that's a very pertinent question, because I've seen a lot of shows that are kind of, I'm settling the score. And we'll see those, and again, say this with compassion because we're all going through what we go through. And the first half of my shows were kind of that, in that I believed my own stories. So it's just worth asking oneself, what is my story in service of? Is it bolstering my narrative about myself, that I'm a victim, or that I'm hard done by, or that I'm awesome and victorious? And if somebody's story is full of trauma, I wouldn't deny that for a second. The advice that I would give, and I've given this a number of times, is, first of all, there's a number of self-sabotaging habits that we have that are us doing it. But with trauma, it's by definition rooted in something that happened to us. And nobody asked for the trauma that happened to them growing up, no matter what it is. Like, that's just, it's insane to think that's the case, even though we often think that about ourselves. People often justify the trauma that, I was a brat. Of course my parents hit me. Like, I was asking for it. No, you weren't. You might think that might be a story that you've developed to tell yourself that, but no child deserves to be beaten or molested or emotionally abused or anything like that. But even if it is completely unwarranted and you're able to discern that and own it, if it's the story of, like, say, I was bullied for no particular reason and it made my childhood hell. But what's far more interesting to me in terms of stories is I was bullied for my entire childhood. It made my childhood hell. I did nothing to deserve it. That's the first third of the story. The middle third of the story is, here's the result that had on my behavior and how that wreaked havoc even after the bullying stopped. Then the final third is, here's what I did with that once I realized it. So once again, this is about me. There's all the shit that happened to me. And then there's, what do I do with that? And how do I look at that with compassion? And what I do with that might be as simple as, I realized it. It took me forever. It took me decades, and now I can see it. And just that is a victory. I can look at myself and I can look at the things I've experienced with compassion that I didn't have before I realized it. That is huge. And that's relevant to everyone, whether they had the experiences that are similar to yours or not.
I love that. That's great, TJ. I like that a lot. I wanted to ask you a little bit more about the online course that you give, because I'm interested in how you help bring people along in that journey. So I'm assuming that anybody who signs up for it is already kind of saying in their heads, yes, this is something that I want to do. So I'm open to it. I'm ready to do it. I want to do this. They might not realize how difficult it may be for some of them. That they like the idea of doing it, but actually once they get into the nitty gritty of going through all of the work of figuring out what their story is and thinking about actually sharing that on stage, I think I'm just projecting right now, but I'm imagining it's kind of intimidating. So what are some of the things that you do to sort of help people through that process where there's going to be dips. There have to be dips in that process. So how do you help them through those?
There's a number of ways. The thing that I begin every single lesson with and end every single exercise with, like we just do it again and again. It's the simplest technique. It is not unique to me. We all do it all the time anyway. Breathing. Conscious breaths. And by doing it, I never use this word, but I'm tricking people into meditating. And that is a whole lot easier to do when you're doing it with others. And that's the other trick, is you are there for each other. The course is not, I'm going to tell you a bunch of shit and you're going to take notes and then you're going to do what I tell you. It is much more, let's get us working together. And we are all in this for each other and with each other. And we will bring out the best of each other. And the fact that I can show up for you helps me show up for me. Because so many of us will show up for somebody else in a heartbeat, and we won't show up for ourselves forever. But I care about you. And if you care about me too, then suddenly we're all in this together and we can all do this. And I've been ensconced in this for so long, not just the course, but my career, that it sometimes slips my awareness that this isn't normal. That these are conversations that most of us are having on an average Tuesday.
No,
it is for me. And so when people come into this, I get reminded of that, of like, oh yeah, that's pretty special to be with somebody who is revealing that I have always felt an inordinate need to get the approval of others. And for that to be received without judgment, or whatever the given thing is. And then that just gives everybody else permission to go there as well. And there's a closeness that develops with people because we're all here for each other. And you've inspired me to be vulnerable in this way. And then you inspire me back. And then it's this virtuous circle of empathy and creativity and love.
So much of what you said resonated so close to me that I feel extremely lucky to have had this conversation with you.
Well, thank you so much for thinking of me. It's a pleasure to be involved. I love sharing this stuff and it enlivens me.
Amazing.
And it's great to connect.
It is. It really is.